When you fertilize, you restore the diploid DNA. The zygote is basically the one-cell stage of development. It's basically like day one post-fertilization. Okay? So fertilization may happen on day 14 of the female ovarian cycle. When the sperm enters the oocyte, it's N plus N, the zygote forms its 2N. Now you get ready for divisions, mitotic divisions, so that this one cell stage becomes 2, becomes 4, and they call these first cell divisions mitotic cleavages. You're dividing. The one cell, which has to become a baby, undergoes mitotic cleavages, where simply the one cell, zona pellucida is white, but I'm drawing on a white board, so I'll just use blue for zona pellucida, ZP. It's not part of what will be the embryo. It's external to it. The one cell is what is developing into a person. I'll just draw one cell in there with a nucleus. Now the zona pellucida has this kind of rigid shape. It doesn't change. So if one cell is going to become 2, you don't double the space because ZP prevents that. So the cell has to reduce in size. That's what a cleavage is, where the daughter cells reduce in size with each division. Daughter cells reduce in size with each division. And that's good. Smaller cells are easier to nourish. So if one cell becomes 2, ZP doesn't really change in size. There's like a 2-cell stage. The 2 cells become 4 cells. So this is like the first couple of days, these first cell divisions. So it's like the first day after fertilization. Here's a 4-cell stage, 2 days post-fertilization. So all the days I'm giving of development are post-fertilization. So let's write that. So it's 2 days post-fertilization. That's what I'm writing here. Talked about fertilization last time. The site of fertilization is the ampulla of the uterine tube, and we're still in there. Okay? So all this is happening, location, uterine tube. So yeah, let's move on. It comes after day 2, day 3. Of course, at some point we'll skip days. I mean, we're not doing every day for 40 weeks, right? bleed forever. But we'll go from day 2 to day 3, and what do you got? You got a little ball of cells. And this stage is called morula, which is a word that means mulberry. Okay, little ball of cells. And I won't try to draw it. We'll just say, go up here, day 3 post-fertilization, morula. Typically a morula is like 16 cells, so you can refer to it as morula, 16 cell stage. Little ball of cells. And keep track of ZP. Is it pictured here? I know it's white on white. I see it.
Yeah.
Still there. Okay. At some point it's going to degenerate. It's got to for implantation, but it's still there. We're still in the uterine tube. Just keep on going. Now, to show you more about what happens on the inside as you develop, when you get to what's called the early blastocyst stage, day 4, you start to see the ZP degenerate. And on the inside, if you cut that ball of cells open, some cells form a boundary around here called the trophoblast. And some cells are just this inner mass of cells. That's kind of the anatomy. And the thing is, we always want to keep track of what's actually the baby and what is not. Because, let me write what I just said down first. Day 4. Blastocyst. Got a degenerating zona pellucida. I'll say zona pellucida degenerates. You get this inner mass of cells surrounded by trophoblast cells. What Ann said was the inner mass cells, that's the embryo. That will be the baby, the embryo. Becomes embryo. And that the cells surrounding it are called trophoblast cells. Now, there's a term called extraembryonic structures that support development but aren't actually part of the baby proper. They actually will become part of the placenta. Okay. So anything that supports development but is not actually part of the baby, they use the term a lot, extraembryonic is the term. Okay, you start to see that as soon as day 4 post fertilization. Just go to day 5. And what you see, this picture here, an implanting blastocyst, well, they say day 7. Okay, so we'll just go to day 7. I'll just write that term. You see the inner mass of cells surrounded by trophoblast cells. There's no ZP. No zona pellucida. So to give you a better picture of what's happening for this pre-embryonic development, I kind of like have this is a good figure to look at because it shows you fertilization occurring in the ampulla of the uterine tube. And then for the first week or so, there are contractions in the isthmus to keep the conceptus in the uterine tube while the endometrium prepares for implantation. So prior to day 7, you're stuck in the uterine tube. prior to day 7. Isthmus of uterine tube contracts. Keeping the isthmus, keeping the conceptus in uterine tube while the endometrium prepares for implantation. So yeah, always keep track of the days post-fertilization, but the day this early, keep track of where you are in the ovarian cycle. If fertilization occurred on the female ovarian cycle, what day is it again? 14. Now we're talking days post-fertilization, but if I say you implant somewhere around day 7, what day is that in the ovarian cycle? 21, which should be, you know, the peak of secretory phase. So when I say making preparations for implantation, that's the phase, right? So fertilize here, keep it in the uterine tube for a few days, formed cell stage, morula. Okay, then I said it degenerates, the ZP does at around day 4. They call that the hatching. Somewhere around day 4 thereafter, day 5 or 6 or something, it's allowed entrance into the uterine cavity. There might be a day where we're just like floating around. Like it may be a free floating blastocyst, let's say, I don't know, call it day 6. Free floating. Floating around, but at some point, you know, it's got to stick. Maybe it's day 5, it's free floating, I don't know. At some point it sticks. So let's talk about the implantation of the blastocyst. Implantation of the blastocyst involves, first, sticking. So if you look at my slide here, see a little speck in the box, with a little blue speck, which is the inner mass of cells. Remember the cells surrounding the trophoblast? If you're going to implant, first stick. And I guess they call that here, around day 6, 7 post-fertilization, adhesion of the implanting blastocyst. So that's kind of why I have day 6, we just add to it. Following free-floating, adhesion. You know what that means? That means stick. There's like a lot of surface proteins that allow this little ball to stick to the endometrial surface like Velcro. If you cut it open, and look what's happening during this adhesion of the implanting blastocyst. There's no matter how you stick, say the inner mass cell is like over here, it free rotates to face the endometrium. So with adhesion, there is a free rotation of inner mass cells that face endometrium. got two things. You have the little structure called the blastocyst that's ready to implant. It's just stuck. But then there are all these changes happening. The endometrial cells, they become more round. It's like they're getting ready for pregnancy here. I'll just say simply, the endometrium prepares for pregnancy.
So this is day 6?
Yes. And on all my slides, I try to put it somewhere. On this slide, it says it on the bottom. It's kind of hard to see. Around day 6, 7. Let's see. Pregnancy. Any questions? Okay. Well, here's day 7 here. And what I try to do is I just try to show you what's different from day to day. I already have day 7 up here. Well, I think call it day 8. I hate when my days don't match. Change that to 8. Ooh. Let's go. I mean, you just look at the picture. What does it look like it's doing? It's not just stuck anymore, right? It's like, I think implanting is a good descriptor, right? It's definitely digging its way in. Okay? And so how does it do it? It's implanting blastocyst. The word I have on the slide is invasion. So day 6 or 7, you float, stick, invade. And for the implanting blastocyst, the trophoblast differentiates into 2 layers, the cytotrophoblast and the syncytiotrophoblast, this yellow blob. Write that down. Trophoblast is a term that means nourishment generator. It will become the placenta. For now, let's see that it differentiates into 2 layers. That would be cytotrophoblast syncytiotrophoblast. Invasion. A lot of things happen in the first week. That cytotrophoblast is just a cellular boundary around the inner mast cells. And the inner mast cells is actually not inner mast cells anymore. The blob of cells that was inner mast cells has organized into 2 layers of cells called bilaminar, which means 2 layers, bilaminar embryonic disc. Okay, let's check that. First thing I said, trophoblast, a cellular boundary around what's called the bilaminar embryonic disc. The bilaminar embryonic disc, be able to identify both layers, epiblast, hypoblast. Let me go back to here. 2 layers, bilaminar, epiblast. Epi overlying. Sometimes it's called superficial layer of cells because it's, I guess, on top. Now, on the slide, it's blue. Epiblast or superficial layer of cells or hypoblast. Deep layer of cells, okay. So epiblast and hyperblast, that is the baby, okay? Now the thing about it is, some of those cells for epiblast and hypoblast form extraembryonic structures called amnion and yolk sac. So I like the color code because you can see some of, like these blue cells are not part of the epiblast. They're part of the amnion that's starting to form, amniotic cavity. Eventually that fluid-filled cavity will envelop the whole baby, but we don't even have a baby yet. We have 2 layers of cells. But you can see they form from amniotic cells, form from epiblast, cells that will become the yolk sac, form from hypoblast. You should note that. Cells from epiblast or amnion, cells from hypoblast form yolk sac. So once again, epiblast, hypoblast, that's baby, that's call it preembryo, that is the baby. But cells from those layers form amnion and yolk sac, that's not technically the baby, extraembryonic. So to this one, to that one, that's extra. More on that layer later, because they're not fully formed yet. These extraembryonic things, they all support development. They're just not the baby. Other things to note. I mean, the reason you're digging in is because you have this flesh-eating syncytial trophoblast. A syncytium is a fused tissue. You can find that term. A fused tissue. A fused tissue is where the cells don't maintain their cell membrane. They all just become fused together as one big cytoplasm blob. And in this case, the cytoplasm has all these digestive things that allow it to digest endometrium, eat your way in. You get past the epithelium, you eat your way in. So some of the things in there are things like tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF alpha for short, tumor necrosis factor, cadherins, which are sticky proteins, just to name a couple. You can look up a lot of other things, but basically you just dissolve and grab, okay? You don't dissolve and fall out. So the cadherins help you grab onto what you're dissolving into. Also in this area, they find HCG. Remember that one? Now I taught it before as it sustaining the corpus luteum, and it will. Okay, it's a gonadotropin. But what you got to do is you got to dig far enough to nick a blood vessel. Because remember, hormones get into the bloodstream, but you got to dig a little deeper. You got some blood vessels there. And once you get into the bloodstream, that gonadotropin can sustain the corpus luteum, which is where? This is uterus. Where's corpus luteum?
Ovary.
Yeah, ovary, yeah, very good. Okay. So you get this syncytium, this syncytiotropoblast, which is basically, that's doing the invading. So functionally, I'm going to put an arrow here. I mean, that is what is accomplishing the invasion, right? Okay, that's all I see. So the goal here is to dig fast. You have to nick a blood vessel or you're going to die. There's no blood supply here, right? What's keeping the cells alive? Nothing. It's like holding its breath until it can become bathed in maternal blood and nourished. All nourishment is by diffusion, but there's nothing nourishing it yet. So the goal is dig faster, running out of breath. It's like being locked in a trunk. You're going to suffocate unless someone opens the trunk. In this case, you need to nick a blood vessel. So we have models in the room that kind of simulate this timeline. This is like day 8. This is about 1 week if you look at the model. It's about the same thing. And the thing I like to tag on this one is the syncytiotrophoblast, the dark maroon. Invading number 7, I guess called the endometrium. You have cytotrophoblasts and syncytiotrophoblasts. Syncytiotrophoblasts is like the dark maroon, but you see that light pinkish? I'm going with cytotrophoblasts for the light pink. But then it looks like this yellow stuff here. I don't know why they do that, but that's all cytotrophoblasts, the 2 layers there. It looks more cellular there. They should have made it look like that throughout the whole layer. I see 2 layers of cells, epiblast, hypoblast, on the drawing here. Epiblast, hypoblast. I see a little bit of amnion there. I see a little bit of it there. So the models match up pretty good with the picture from the book. Y'all trying to show the same stuff.
The picture in the book shows the cytoblast as pink,
Oh, does it?
and the model shows it as,
Are we talking about our book?
your slide, the next slide over.
Oh.
See how it says cytoblast?
Cytotrophoblast is pink here, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cytotrophoblast. And you see how the cells are maintaining their cell membranes here? But look at the cytotrophoblast. They kind of disintegrate and becomes a giant blob. So this is 9 days, and we're fully in. Okay. Let's see here. So what are the new things? Well, we have yolk sac amnion, we already noted that. We still have 2 layers of cells. Epiblast, hypoblast, we already noted that. We still have syncytio and cytotrophoblasts. I guess the new thing here on day 9 is lacuna start to develop. These are basically spaces. And they will become filled with maternal blood, so they're important. So let's note that. Day 9. So we start to see lacuna. There's spaces around the whole blastocyst, which is fully inside now. Now, once you're all in, you can define what are called the 3 deciduous. What I'd said previously was that when you get ready for implantation, that the endometrium makes preparations for pregnancy. And when that actually happens, the changes in the endometrium that happen are called, this fancy word called decidualization. And well, basically, the decidua is the endometrium of pregnancy. That's what I want you to know. decidua. Like what's a deciduous tree? It's got leaves that fall off. It means, that's what it means, fall off. Like when you decide something, you decide on something, what happens to the other thing? Goes away. Forgot about it. That's kind of what it means. So it means that which falls off. And here what we see is, well, they call it the three deciduous. I've seen that term before. The three deciduous. Endometrium, basically that's surrounding our implanted blastocyst. Now the endometrium, or the decidua, that's kind of like underlying the blastocyst, is called the decidua basalis. So basically, endometrium underlying, well, now it's a blastocyst. But no matter what stage of development, it's always the decidua basalis. Okay. That's important. This is the same side as the placenta. So basically, put a star next to this. This one is the important one. It is the maternal part of the placenta. That's important. Maternal portion of placenta. A placenta, the word means pie shape, but it's the interaction of nutrition that mom gives to baby. So a placenta needs two parts. You need the mom part and the baby part so that the blood can intermix. This is the mom part. The baby part hasn't even developed yet, so I can't talk about it. Then there's the endometrium overlying. That's the decidua capsularis. Endometrium overlying baby, or in this case, blastocyst. And then basically lining the rest of the uterine cavity where baby is not, they call it decidua parietalis. Basically lining the rest of the uterine cavity. Decidua parietalis. Endometrium, lining rest of uterine cavity. So, after you give birth, there's what's called the afterbirth. Something else comes off. What is it? The placenta. And the fancy word for that is decidua basalis. A lot of bleeding. We give mom iron supplements when we leave the hospital. Okay, I'm going to fast forward just to teach the three deciduas on another slide. I know students don't like it when I do that, but I'll jump right back. So if you jump to a slide like this, where you have much more development, this is 13 weeks, a few months. The three deciduas are, the decidua basalis this is the part that's underlying. Decidua basalis, that light pink. It's on the same side as it's the placenta basically. See the lifeline, the umbilical cord? So it's on the same side as the umbilical cord, decidua basalis. So this little pink overline, decidua capsularis. Okay, and lining the rest of it, decidua parietalis. The uterine cavity is a sliver. See that? Okay. Sometimes you want to induce labor. the physician can use maybe fingers or a dull object to kind of like poke and rupture them. It's very painful, it causes contractions, but you can see them now. Okay, I'm gonna jump back to where we were. Question?
Yeah, so which part is like the water breaking?
The blue stuff, the amnion. And when you break the water, the amnion breaks, and you have to break these other layers too. I'll define those later. But the water breaking is the fluid inside the amniotic cavity, colored blue here. Okay. And where we were, here, that amnion is now just this little tiny bubble right there. Okay. And then we look at here, called the two balloons. See that balloon? That's the amnion, that's the yolk sac. So right now, that's the amnion. Right now, it's like there's hardly anything in the uterine cavity because you're just a little grain of sand burrowing your way inside there. Okay, so that was, what we left out was day 9. There's 12 days. And finally, you nick blood vessels. Maternal sinusoids are blood vessels. You first nick veins, then you nick arteries, the spiral arteries. Okay, so this is 12. So again, always take an inventory. What was there before? I'm not going to write it again, but what's new? I see the two balloons, yolk sac, amnion. Now, are those part of the baby? I said no. Yolk sac, amnion, I said extra embryonic. Not part of the baby, but will be very supportive in development. Okay. Do you see both of the trophoblast things, cyto and syncytio? Yes and yes. I'm point them out. Cytotrophoblast. And then, well, syncytiotrophoblast is all like the yellow stuff around it. Syncytiotrophoblast. I see lots of lacuna. And new cells are emerging on the scene. They're called extraembryonic mesoderm. They're colored red. Let's note that. Extraembryonic mesoderm. They actually help form the placenta. So let's just write it down for now. Start to see. Extraembryonic mesoderm, very good. You start to see how the lacuna begin to nick maternal sinusoids, which are veins. I'll just say lacuna become filled with blood from maternal sinusoids as well as the glycogen secretions of the uterine glands. Okay. The glycogen of uterine glands. So day 12, you're starting to get some nourishment for the baby, and it's going to be all by diffusion. I mean, there's no circulatory system yet. All by diffusion. So we're at day 12, and there's an important event that happens just a couple of days later, 2-3 days later, and it's called gastrulation. Gastrulation is where you get this organization of 3 primary germ layers, shown here. And basically, they form all the organ systems in the body. So it's kind of important event there. So I'll put this as a side note there. Gastrulation. What we'll see in our discussion is a bilaminar embryonic disc becomes a trilaminar embryonic disc. bilaminar embryonic disc becomes a trilaminar embryonic disc. And that trilaminar, tri would be 3 layers. They're right there. Endoderm, mesoderm, ectoderm that form all the organ systems. Okay, well. Again, here's 14 to 15 days. This is about when it would occur. And it's still bilaminar, but it's going to happen. So something like day 14 to 15 days post-fertilization. And the figure I'll use is, it's a good one, it's from the Marriott textbook. And if you look at the top there, top left, they show you the 2 balloons and the bilaminar embryonic disc. You got the 2 balloons, but what we're talking about is the trilaminar disc being formed from the bilaminar disc in the middle. So what this figure does is they just kind of chop off the 2 balloons. They just look at the disc and they slice it. So the gastrulation events, when you take the disc from the 2 balloons shown there, and you take that structure and then slice it and look at a sectional view, you can see gastrulation. So the first thing that happens around day 14, 15 is you have this primitive streak which will become the space for the vertebral canal. Cells from the epiblast layer, they migrate into that streak and then dive down here. And they kind of take over the bottom layer and they form what will become the endoderm. All right, so let's just continue up here. So around day 14, 15, you get this first migration. Okay. So that is where cells from the epiblast layer migrate into primitive streak, and they form the endoderm underneath. About a day later, day 16, you have a second migration. Same thing. Cells from the epiblast layer migrate into the streak, this time forming a mid-layer called the mesoderm. Cells from epiblast layer migrate into the primitive streak. the mesoderm. So basically, you're done. The cells that didn't migrate, that remain, just now call the ectoderm. So I'm writing remaining epiblast cells form the ectoderm. So those are our three layers of the trilaminar embryonic disc: the ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm. Again, those three germ layer of cells will form the entire, well, all of the organ systems. Here's a kind of different picture of it. Here's a different perspective. I just want to point out to you the three layers. Always look for the three layers. Is it 2 or is it 3? Because around day 14-ish, it changes from 2 to 3. And now, at this stage of development, I can mention the 4 major extraembryonic membranes. 2 I've already mentioned, these 2. And now we can start to see the formation of allantois and chorion. So up to 16 days. So, some of the four main structures that will support baby that are not part of the baby, amnion is one. I just call it amnion. You can call it the amniotic cavity if you want, because it's a space. It provides a water-filled environment for the baby. Baby's not breathing, it's okay to be in water. That's why it's okay to give birth underwater. It was in water the whole time, it's okay to give birth there. Yolk sac. In humans, it's good for the genesis of blood cells and blood vessels. Okay, the allantois, right here. Right now, it's this little, call it an evagination of the yolk sac, but it's its own thing there. It's called allantois. And evagination, that just means little parts sticking out. Evagination of yolk sac, that's how it appears. Basically, it will help form the umbilical stalk or umbilical cord. It helps form the urinary bladder. Helps to form umbilical stalk. 3, what's the fourth thing? The fourth thing is the chorion. Now, the chorion, of all things I'm mentioning, I spend the most time discussing. The chorion is the embryo part of the placenta. It's not really shown here. Let's look at this picture here. Chorion. I'll describe it as the embryo part of the placenta. And let's remember what the maternal part was, the decidual basalis. They interact together for an exchange of blood. So I'm writing decidual basalis, just to remind us, that was maternal part of the placenta. Chorion's right here. Let me zoom in a little bit. And what I like about this figure is it shows us a couple of things. Going back, this is day 16, that's kind of where we're at. Going back a little bit, 7.5 implanting, talked about that. And always look for, do you see the 2 layer or the 3 layers? What do you see here? 2 or 3? Is it a bilaminar or is it a trilaminar? Bilayered, bilaminar. 2 here, what do you see on the next one? 2 or 3? I see 2. Boom. So the next one, that was day 12. Get gastrulation on day 16. Do I see 2 or 3 here?
3.
There's 3. Okay, so by day 16, you have 3 layers. And the chorion right here, see the little loop around it? There's like 3 layers of cells there. Okay, so you got the syncytiotrophoblasts, the cytotrophoblast, and the proliferating extraembryonic mesoderm. Syncytiotrophoblasts. The first 2 we already mentioned, just the trophoblast thing. Cytotrophoblast. The third thing is this proliferating extraembryonic mesoderm. That's the chorion, those layers, and it helps form the maternal part placenta. Oh, what's that? Oh, yeah, chorion is embryo part, yes. Right here. So you can kind of see why that would be the baby part of the placenta, because the mom's blood is right there. That's something else to know. By day 16, you have lacuna filled with maternal blood. That's shown quite nicely. Write that down. Day 16 is where we were, anyways. Day 16, make a checklist. You got a trilaminar embryonic disc. You got chorion with all these other things. You got chorion with, well, let me put this. You got chorion. So I define the chorion. However, the chorion begins to take shape. You have these like little finger-like projections called the chorionic villi. Plural. Just describing the shape of the chorion, which is these 3 cell layers. Villi means finger shape. So like between my 5 fingers are all chorion, shaped like fingers. The space in between my fingers is lacuna, and they're filled with blood. Okay. So lacunae, E pluralizes it, filled with maternal blood. Little puddles of blood, but they're not stagnant pools of blood. The blood is continuously renewed. There's blood circulation there. This blood is continuously renewed. Right, so a lot of effort to mention chorion, the 3 layers, okay? The beige stuff is the syncytial trophoblast. The cytotrophoblast is that cellular layer right there, I'm tracing it. You see the mesoderm in our trilaminar disc? See how some of it proliferates out? That's why it's extraembryonic. It's not part of the baby here. Part of the baby here, just not when it's part of the chorion. All right, so day 16. We do have a model in the room that's kind of in between them. Take 15, so it's still bilaminar embryonic disc. Still plug that out. And all the models I'm showing on the slides are labeled on the lab practical study guide. So now that we have enough development here, we can talk about the placenta, the chorion, and the decidual basalis. The placenta is formed by the chorionic villi of the embryo, and the decidual basalis of the mother. There's gas exchange, solute exchange, especially with glucose. And let's remember that HCG at this time, the trophoblast cells from the chorion secrete human chorionic gonadotrophin. Okay. I said earlier for the trophoblast, but the trophoblast is part of the chorion, so it's basically saying the same thing. And well, basically, here is HCG. It goes away because at around 20 weeks, placenta is fully kicking in and you have placental hormones there. Okay. But prior to that, before you have them, you have HCG sustaining corpus luteum, and the corpus luteum will continue to secrete those sex hormones, right? So when you first start to see it, is a couple of weeks in. That's where we are, day 16. You start to see its levels rise. Okay. So if it's 2 weeks gestation, what is it for the ovarian cycle? It's about day 28 when you should have menses. But if you're pregnant, are you going to? No, this is when it's like, oh wait, how come I didn't have menses, right? It's about 2 weeks later and you didn't have it, and you wait, you're very late, and these levels are rising, you may detect it in your whole pregnancy test. Okay. So 13 days, this is still bilaminar, 13 to 21 days. Okay, 21 days, we see the genesis of blood vessels in the yolk sac. We see blood vessels within the chorionic villi, so there's some circulation starting to happen. And the baby is, the embryo looks like an embryo, and it's inside the amniotic cavity. It's 3 weeks. extraembryonic vessels in chorionic villi. Very good. Here's a close-up picture of the chorionic villi. And close-ups are good. It clearly shows you the three parts of the chorion: the cytotrophoblast, the syncytiotrophoblast, and the pink is the extraembryonic mesoderm surrounding the embryonic blood vessels. So this is blood flow circulating to and from the baby. So that's 21 days. Here's 4.5 weeks. And at 4.5 weeks, I see chorionic villi surrounding all of the baby. And I see many branches of maternal blood filling all the lacuna. Okay. So, which decidua is this one? Decidua basalis. What about the one over here? Capsularis, yeah. Now, do you see how the chorionic villi are flattening? Eventually, those will go away. They're starting to flatten here. So it's 4.5 weeks post-fertilization. So I'm writing, you see chorionic villi surround the embryo. But eventually, you just want them on the same side as the umbilical cord. So the ones on the capsularis side, they completely flatten out. Here's a model that we have in the room. This is about 1 month, 4.5 weeks, right? And here's a model we have in the room that kind of looks like it. Let's kind of look at the chorionic villi surrounding it. So the chorionic villi on the capsularis side are flattening out. So they give you a little bit of tissue there. That would be the decidua capsularis. So this side here, decidua basalis, you can see the maternal blood vessels and maternal veins. And what I like about this model is they do show the gas exchange from red to blue. So the blue is on the way out. Okay, the red's coming in. If you look at the dark maroon color, the entire time that's been the syncytiotrophoblast, shaped like chorionic villi. You know, a lot of times I'll just tag this, and students will put chorionic villi, or they'll put embryonic blood vessels, and I'll accept either, because that's what it is. Or if you want to be thorough, you could say chorionic villi with embryonic blood vessels, and that'll be a more impressive answer, because that's everything. That's an umbilical cord, that's a yolk sac. What is white here, the amnion, is blue over there. Okay? And that's about all I would ask. Go from 1 month to 3 months, or about 13 weeks. And I kind of gave you a preview of this before. All of the chorionic villi have flattened out. So 13 weeks. There's a word for that. The chorion being flattened out is not on this slide. It's called the chorion leve. It's the chorion where the villi are squashed. That means flat.
What color is it?
All right, let's see if we can follow it. Do you see the chorionic villi on this side? So follow that beige color. It's kind of like that beige, dark brown color there. Let me turn the lights off. See right there? there's three colors right there. There's a lot of colors. Well, okay, let me give you three that are important. Like if the doctor wants to induce labor by rupturing the membranes, you would rupture that one. You would rupture the amnion. Boom. And the third one is the decidua capsularis. Right, there's also all that. Rupture to induce labor, or it just could rupture on its own. Yeah, question?
Sorry, can I go on that? But I know sometimes during pregnancy, moms' white blood cells attack the baby's blood to form more blood. Why? Is that because like an issue with development of the chorion, or like interaction between?
The only one I'm aware of is antibodies from mom that attack baby's blood, called erythroblastosis fetalis. It's because of the blood, where dad had Rh positive blood. Is that what you're talking about? I'm not sure what you're talking about because there's a lot of things I don't know.
Is it just because like the development of the chorion in the basalis is like ineffective, and mom's blood is able to get the baby's blood and attack it?
Yes. So that whole concept where anything from mom attacks baby is because the molecule could cross the placental barrier. There's not too many things that can. Some antibodies can, like the one I mentioned. What I just mentioned, I'll teach about it when I get to blood type, just don't worry about it. But you're right. Let's look at the placenta more closely. Yeah. That's actually my next slide. Thanks for the segue. Right here. Okay, this is what you got to know. So, talking about the placenta. This slide befuddles students. I don't know why. We got a model of it. I always put it on the test and the practical, and so let's sharpen up. Pay attention. Placental physiology. The most crucial things that cross the placenta are the blood gases and glucose. Those are the key things that it has. So what we have here is the chorionic villi with embryonic blood vessels. And we see the maternal blood vessels here, the maternal veins and the arteries here, the spiral arteries to be precise. Let's first talk about, let's do it this way. Let's use colors. Blue usually means nutrient poor, deoxygenated, oxygen poor blood. That's the case here. These two these two arteries that are blue are umbilical arteries. So in fetal circulation, the arteries are blue because they're carrying deoxygenated, nutrient poor blood. And they're taking it away from the baby to the placenta. So you have two. They carry, let's say, O2 poor, nutrient poor, you thought it was what? No, these are arteries. and they are blue. It's kind of reversed for baby, okay? The two umbilical arteries carry O2 for nutrient for blood away from, I'll just say baby, fetus, embryo, whatever you want to call the baby. You're carrying it away from the baby. You're taking that blood to be exchanged at the placenta, at the lacuna. Okay. I know you're used to being veins being one color and arteries being another. Forget about your rules for now. See two umbilical arteries? How many do you see? Two. I see two. What color are they? So yeah, just go with that for now. Okay. So you take that blood away. Mom has to deal with it. So if you look at the gas exchange here, pull back a little. See the white arrows showing the direction of blood flow? Maternal veins will take that blood away. Okay, mom deals with that. All the waste and stuff that baby's getting rid of is here, and mom deals with it. So let's note the blue maternal veins. I'll just say collects this blood, carries it away. Okay. So when I say this blood, I mean this blood. Carries it away. It's kind of the exchange there. Umbilical arteries take it away, maternal veins collect it up at the lacuna. This is the placenta and carries it away. So what is delivering the goods? Maternal arteries are, spiral arteries. They're taking oxygen-rich, nutrient-rich blood to the placenta, to the lacuna. So I'll use red. Maternal arteries deliver O2 rich nutrient rich blood to I'll say lacuna. Lacunae, those pools of blood. So it gets it that far, but then you need the umbilical vein to collect that blood and take it to the baby. So the vein is draining the blood to baby. It's returning it to baby. So veins return blood, arteries take the blood away. Here you see the collection there in the embryonic blood vessels. They all gather into one umbilical vein. You only got one. And it's red. One. I mean, I wish there was like 500. There's like only one. This is it. If this ruptures, that's it. Can't do it. One umbilical vein collects this blood. Again, this blood, right? It carries it to baby. So that's all in the umbilical cord. So the umbilical cord is the lifeline because it has the one umbilical vein there. All right, now here's another thing that students always miss it. Yeah, it drives me crazy. Do you see decidual basalis on this video? You may see it now on the test. Man, you're going to forget. It's the most missed question on the test. Not that you'll miss it. I just see it every year. And I try to avoid it by saying that. Decidua basalis. It'll be somewhere, right? That's the mom portion of the placenta. what's the baby portion? Chorion, right? They put a big bracket from here to there, but there it is right there, because that all goes to the baby. So you got the decidual physalis, you got the stratum physalis of the endometrium. Remember, that's the one that's not sloughed off. The endometrium, the functional layer, that becomes the decidual physalis, and that's what we're talking about here. So on this figure, be able to identify, if it's red and blue, it's maternal artery, maternal vein. It's kind of reversed for the baby. They have two umbilical arteries, one umbilical vein. Okay? Okay, identify. Decidual physalis. Okay, look for it. Look for it. Now, what if they change the color like on the model? Don't let that throw you off. Be smarter than the model. Okay? Oh, they changed the color. I don't know what it is. Don't let that happen to you. They give you plenty of time to study in lab and get all your ducks in a row. Well, let's skip to labor and delivery or nutrition. What happens is you get 40 weeks and baby wants to come out. Contractions of labor are very painful. They begin at the top of the uterus. They sweep down towards the cervix. They occur. They're strong. They occur at regular intervals. They increase in force and frequency. Change position of the fetus. You want to move it head first toward the birth canal or the cervical canal. When you go to the hospital, I remember they told me 511. Contractions are about 5 minutes apart. Each contraction is about a minute, and this happens for about an hour. You might be dilated enough. You can. That's about right. It's a good rule of thumb. So, when you get to the hospital, they'll conduct a cervical exam to see if you're really about to give birth or you're faking it. They might send you home. You've got all this pain, they send you home. It just depends on the cervical exam. So here's what they examine when you get to the hospital. So when I say cervical exam, are they examining your neck? No. I'm just going to make sure you're with me here. The obstetrician can do it, nurses can do it. Yeah, you can do it someday. I've never done one. I just read about it. Well, one thing they're going to look for is cervical dilatation. Okay, it's got to dilate to about 10 centimeters to accommodate baby's head, which is the biggest part of the new baby. So basically, goal is 10 centimeters. The other thing that they can palpate in the exam is the cervical wall. Because when baby's head is pushing down on it, the cervix is normally a few centimeters. When baby's head is bearing down, it squashes it, it thins it out. Okay? They call that effacement. And so, when you're not pregnant, it's a few centimeters. During labor, it thins out because the baby's head's coming down. You report it as a percent. If 3 to 4 centimeters is 100%, as it thins out, basically the goal is like 90% effaced. Okay. Cervical wall thins out. Report it as a percent. Okay. Goal 90%. Goal meaning you reach there, you can deliver. start pushing delivers. Take about 3 minutes to an hour or something like that. Okay, the other thing you can feel is the position of baby's head relative to an anatomical landmark called the ischial spine. You can palpate that inside there. And it's basically how far down baby's head is, right, relative to ischial spines. They call that station. Position of baby's head relative to the spines, ischial spines. If you recall, pelvis, the ischial spines are like the narrowest part medially out of the pelvis. Let me point them out to you on the picture of the model we have. The obstetrician view of the pelvis. You see the coccyx inferiorly, right there. Ischial spines right there, ischial spines. There's the ischium. Okay, the spine is right there. So baby's head, you can just feel all this, okay? And the doctor can. So if you're 0, it's like you're right there. Okay. Let me see if I can show you a YouTube video that kind of shows a little better. Give me a second to cue it up. I forget it, it's not working. All right, so because you're using a relative landmark, if the top of baby's head is at the same level as the ischial spines, that's called 0. Okay. +4 is essentially delivery. That's basically what you're seeing here. That means baby's head is 4 centimeters inferior to the spines. If you're -3, you're not even in the pelvis at all. So the goal is like 0, 1, 2. 0 + 1 + 2. You guys can go home and Google it yourself. You want to see that animation? Oh.
Yeah.
So what you have to know is that during an exam, the physician is shouting out numbers. in this order: 4, 80, minus 2, which would mean 4 centimeters dilated, 80% effaced, minus 2 station. Or if they did 10, 100 plus 3, 10 centimeters dilated, 100% effaced, plus 3 stations. So that's kind of the orientation, just in that order. Epidural, if the mom wants to be anesthetized, is they insert a catheter to deliver anesthetics. At around that level, you got to go between the vertebrae there and get it in the epidural space. And here's just kind of a summary of baby being delivered. There's baby's head coming out. Let's see, here's the sacrum. There's late dilatation. There's delivery of the baby, and then the placental stage. It happens about a half an hour after birth. They call it the afterbirth. Let's see here. All right. Well, hey, that's it. That's it. We finished this unit. We're going to take a break. We'll come back to lab today. I just want to give you some time to study. Right? And Wednesday, you have a free study day. I'm not going to lecture. There's no quiz. So you can just show up and study. You have plenty of time. Your exam starts right. All right, let's take a break.